Everybody in, and thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're zooming in from. And I will announce this a couple of times. There's a lot of you joining us that can't turn on your video, and I'm so sorry that we're in a situation for anybody that's joined us for the last two or three meetings that we've had. We have had We've been Zoom bombed several times, and last time we were Zoom bombed by some delightful pornography. So, to prevent that from happening, we have turned off the ability for people to turn on their screens. There's people who I know in this room, and I may start by just turning on some of these. Thank you. Yeah, for anybody, and just my deepest apologies for anybody that was in the room for that experience. Thank you so much to those of you who came back. And for those of you that didn't, we just received the video recording, and we were able to splice the two parts together with a delightful through story so that you'll be getting that this afternoon. But I wanted this morning, instead of focusing on that experience, I want to let people know that as you come in, you will not be able to turn on your video, right now, also people are unmuted, but during the question and answer time, which we'll have with Virginia in a little while, if people do their hand raising, which is down at the bottom of your screen in the icon sort of, or at the top if you're on a iPad or something like that, there's a raise hand icon. And if that's too hard to find, you're welcome to put up in the chat that you would like to raise your hand, and then I will unmute you and you'll be able to have a question with Virginia. And this is being recorded, and our goal is to get you the recording as soon as possible. So this morning, you're hearing an echo. That might be, Gemini, if you have two devices on at the same time in your house that have a microphone on, that might be what's happening there. So I'd like to invite people, if you could put up in the chat where it is you're zooming in from. And also, if this is the first time you've joined us, yeah, thanks. Because we're not hearing it on our end. And if we are, then please let us know, because I want to fix that for everybody. So we are going to get started. And for those of you that are joining us, I would just invite you to please put up in the chat where you're zooming in from. And if this is your first time for an Elisabeth Kübler-Ross event, that would also be wonderful for us to know. I want to just say a little bit about the foundation. My name is Susan Barber, and I have the pleasure of being able to curate a series of educational events for the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation. And so we have community conversations. We have an author series, which Virginia is here with us this morning to talk about her book and why her book was written, and just information that I think is useful for everybody, basically who's alive, because I hope I'm not the first one to tell people that everybody that's alive will at some point be dying. Everybody we love will either die before us, or we will be taking care of them in some way or another. And for many people, like myself included, that was a complete and total shock the first time it happened, and I had no information. So a little bit about the foundation, and then we'll introduce us. So Elisabeth Kübler-Ross was a pioneer in the death and dying movement. She was a remarkable person that just never stayed inside of the lines. For those of you that color outside of lines, Elisabeth was very fond of that. And at a time when people who were ill and dying were put down at the end of the very hall that they were in the hospital to get help with, they were put away, and the belief was that there's nothing we can do to help people that are dying, so we should focus on people who are not dying. And Elisabeth did not believe that at all, and she bucked that system, wrote a book in 1969 on death and dying, and spent her lifetime working to make death and dying something that people could openly talk about, that people were well supported during their experience, both as caregivers and as people on that journey. And at the time of her death, her son Ken set up this foundation so that her work could continue. And for those of you who know her as the death and dying lady, I had the opportunity to meet Elisabeth. Elisabeth was more about living her life than any other person I'd ever met. So in the spirit of that, there are chapters around the world that help people in poor villages in Guatemala get food every day that the foundation supports. There are people being trained as palliative care doctors and nurses across the world through the support of the foundation. And I want to say to all of you who have joined us, for those that are able to donate, and that is not everybody, thank you so much, because that your donations, we are not funded in any other way. Your donations keep our organization going. So thank you so much. Welcome to all of you. I want to just say, I was telling Virginia and I were talking about this earlier, a story. I said to her when I heard about her book, which I want to just hold up here, hoping you can see it, um, that you might notice that it's branded with the Dummy series. And I was telling Virginia, preparing for end of life for Dummies, that in 1988, in a small farm kitchen in upstate New York, I was talking with some friends of mine, and I said to them, several of my friends had died. I was completely unprepared. I had no idea. And I was like, somebody needs to write a dummies book about this, because death and dying for dummies, like everybody has to do that. Everybody will read that. And I did not write that book. But so many years later, Virginia did write that book. So Virginia, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Virginia is an end-of-life doula. She was trained at the University of Vermont and later became a trainer at the University of Vermont's doula program. She's also part of the International End-of-Life Doula Association, otherwise known as ANELDA, and the Visiting Nurse Health or Services. She's been a doula since 2019, and she's working as an end-of-life doula and a hospice and vigil volunteer for the Visiting Nurse Association. And I try to introduce people as brief as possible, because it's much more interesting to talk to them about, like, have them talk about what it is. But I will tell you also that I asked Virginia, like, were you a nurse? Like, what were you doing before? You have a PhD, and she's a research scientist who spent much time in the research world before she had children and became a stay-at-home mom. So like me, Virginia was not on this line at a career day in high school or college, but she came to this work through her own experience, and she's going to share that with us this morning. And she's also going to share about her book and do some reading from the book. And Virginia, if you could just introduce yourself a little bit more fully than I did. I'm going to put up in the chat why people's video isn't working, and we'll go from there.
So first, thank you so much, Susan, and the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation for inviting me here today. It is always such an honor to speak to your audience, because I really am impressed by the curiosity and the desire for people to know more. And obviously, the foundation does so many proactive events, not only, community, nationally, but globally, to really raise the awareness of death and dying in our culture. Susan, I'm going to do all my thank yous now before people leave. But I also want to thank.
Please do that.
Yeah, I also want to thank, you know, John Wiley and Sons, the publisher of the Dummies series,
Yeah.
because, what do we think about when we think about for dummies? We think about learning Java language. We think about tax accounting. We think about maybe French cooking. Or my editor just recently told me that they did a book on how to stand up paddleboard. But, I mean, all these things are quite instructional topics. Can you really say that preparing for end of life can be instructional? So I really think it was really brave and very forward thinking of John Wiley and Sons to approach this topic and make it available to people. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I talk about how I came to write this book, but I really want to thank the publisher, my editors. I want to thank all the end-of-life doulas that I know, even if I don't know you and you're in the room. Thank you very much for the work that you're doing. It's inspiring. It's what keeps me inspired in the work, and it keeps me going and wanting to talk more about it, to spread the word, and to just be there for every single person out there who's looking for something different about death. And thank you for all of you for being here today. So I really appreciate this. A little bit about myself. So, as Susan mentioned, I had no familiarity with death and dying for most of my life, and that's really about the first 55 years of my life. I came to the work out of, so I originally trained and educated as a research scientist in organic chemistry. I had two previous careers as an organic chemist in the lab, doing new drug design for the pharmaceutical industry. And then I switched to doing, in the early 1990s, I sort of gave up the lab and jumped on the environmental bandwagon that was big at the time and I became a chemical contamination expert looking at how chemical contamination moved in the field. And then I became a stay-at-home mom, was doing that for 20 years. And honestly, even during all that time, I kept thinking like, oh, I'm not going back to chemistry. What's the next thing I'm going to do? And I honestly didn't really know. I kind of dabbled a lot. I kind of threw around a lot of ideas. And if you had asked me, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, would I be working in death and dying? I mean, there's just no way. It would have been inconceivable to me. And so the fact that I'm here today and that this path has really changed my life in many ways is really remarkable. So I came to this work as an end-of-life doula out of personal tragedy. I'm not like many of the end-of-life doulas that I know who have had positive experiences and sort of want to share that comfort, that reverence, that understanding of the subject of death and dying with others, right? I came out of it because my personal experiences were extremely negative. I came out of it out of personal trauma. I had three close parents die within 7 months. My father died in September of 2016. My mother-in-law died in January of 2017. And then my own mother died in April of 2017. And, we say one death of a close loved one can be very traumatic. But I had three deaths like back to back to back. And it was my first real exposure to death. And it was overwhelming. It was numbing. I was grief-stricken. I was lost in the process. There was an incredible sense of powerlessness and even hopelessness, I'd say. I will share that a couple of the deaths did not go well. And when I say that, I mean that families' wishes were not honored. The medical establishment did horrific things to the bodies of my loved ones that were against families' wishes. And, you're left with their bodies, their mutilated bodies, and you're told to move on. And, they're moving on to the next patient and, that's it. And I've just often wondered why death was like that. Did it have to be like that? I mean, I've had to live with the memories of how my loved ones died. I've had to accept that that was their experience. And I've often felt a great sense of personal frustration and anger that I couldn't do more to effect positive change. But I accept now that I didn't know more. I didn't know better. And obviously, I tried to do the best I could, but I don't know all the things that I do now. And that is a large motivator for why I am an end-of-life doula. So just to cut the long story short, I was really fortunate in that early in my grief journey, I was escaping daily life because I didn't know how to function anymore. And I was meditating at a nearby spiritual center near my home. And one day there was a flyer on the wall that said, "Come to this talk about why death matters." And I thought, oh my God, that's exactly what I want to know. Why death matters. And it was given by a monk of this cultural center, as well as Henry Fusco Weiss. And if people here know Henry, Henry was the original founder of ANELDA, and he also developed the first end-of-life doula program in the country in 2015. So I went to the talk. I met Henry Fusco Weiss. I can't tell you what the rest of the talk was about, but all I remembered was end-of-life doulas, non-medical professionals who companion, who guide, who educate and support the dying and the loved ones, the families, through the process of dying. And all I could remember after the talk was, why wasn't someone like that there for me? Why wasn't someone educating me, telling me about my options, telling me what's happening, even just letting me know that whatever I was feeling was okay and that I was going to be okay afterwards, and letting me know what my options were and how to navigate what is an incredibly intense emotional time. And all of us have experienced that. But we have no skills, we have no knowledge, and we don't know how to navigate these things. And yet we are expected to go through it, suppress it, and move on with life. And it's just simply not possible. It's just simply not healthy. It's not holistic. It's not a good way to embrace something that's such a natural part of living. So that began my journey. And I just thought, well, if I could, I couldn't change what had happened to my loved ones, right? I couldn't change that. But if I could support someone else to not go through the same kind of experience that I had, then that would be my silver lining. So I actually changed my whole life, and I became an end-of-life doula. And now this is the work that I do pretty much full time, in different capacities. I'm always working with patients and clients. I believe in maintaining that contact with the dying. This is not just about educating new doulas to come into the profession, which is I also teach at the University of Vermont, but it's also about staying connected to the people it's also staying connected to the dying people and helping their families and loved ones to guide them through this. So, in the famous words of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, the dying are our teachers. And I will say I have to thank every single person that I've ever served as an end-of-life doula, because the wisdom that they've shared with me, and they may not have known it, that what they were sharing with me was wisdom, but it has become wisdom for me. And I hope to continue to share that and spread the word of what death could be like in a different way if you're open to it. So that was a long introduction. I'm sorry. sorry, Susan. So that's how I've come to the work. Let's see, in 2000, so my mother died in 2017. I got introduced to Henry in June. So, I mean, really, I only had like 2 months of really intense lostness, right? And after I got introduced to Henry, I started to really explore this option of an end-of-life doula. I did all my trainings, and through 2018, I actually spent a year of doing clinical work through my hospice, and I volunteered like crazy. I just thought, well, it's not enough to just do the training. Training is like book knowledge, But what we need to do is really go bedside, right? We need to be with patients. We need to talk to them. I really wanted to see if all this knowledge that I had gained, does it really work? Right? Does it really work? If we apply what we learn about death and dying, can we make a difference for people at end of life? And so I actually, and this was before COVID, so I actually decided that I would spend a year doing clinical work, and I devoted a year to volunteering like crazy at my hospice. I got exposed to lots of people at different races, different ages, different illnesses, different living environments, different family situations, and just lots of different emotions. And that really gave me a strong foundation for understanding what the dying experience is like in America. I did realize that my own experience with my parents was not so unusual. I mean, it was horrible and it was traumatic, but honestly, it's not so unusual, which is unfortunate. And I did also find that if you bring the skills that we've learned about compassionate care, active listening, presence, patience, viewing each individual, each person as a unique individual, you can really transform the dying experience from one where you feel like you're on a conveyor belt. I mean, honestly, that's what it felt like in the hospital, right?
Yeah.
Where you're like on this conveyor belt of care, you're moving from the emergency room and then your last stop is the morgue. I mean, that's what happened to my loved ones. And you can move it away from being on that conveyor belt feeling to one that's really personalized and meaningful. And so it's been my honor to work with so many people. And I began private practice doula work in 2019, which was really fortunate because then COVID happened and I was kind of ahead of the game. And since then, it's just been, one step after another, working with more people, developing a remote practice, seeing people in lots of different kinds of circumstances. And I will say, COVID was a global tragedy, but there was a silver lining for our industry in particular, which is that we're possibly in a new awakening stage of learning about more positive death. And if this can make us less afraid and more open and create more conversations, I think we're going in a really positive direction. Susan, do you want to ask any questions or should
No,
I just
there's just so much. No, there's just so much that you've just said, Virginia. My day job is that I work with incarcerated people, and we have a training around palliative care, memory care, end of life care, so that they can be peer supports in the medical units in the prisons that they are living in. And we had a grief and sort of a grief ritual yesterday with Gabby Jimenez, who some people here know because she's spoken here. Um, and I have to say, like what you've been talking about, this experience, like it's horrible for some people, the way death is handled in hospitals here, but the way it's handled in a prison is really like a level of inhumanity that's hard to imagine in some places. And having these peers work bedside, this work can be so hard, but so many of them expressed yesterday, like being able to be with somebody so that they die knowing that they have dignity, that they were worthwhile, regardless of the mistakes they made in their life, that people care about them, that they are loved, no matter their situation. And they were, it's just this resounding sort of consensus that being able to support somebody at the end of their life is one of the greatest gifts a human being can give to another human being. So being able to have spaces where these conversations are available to people, where these things can be talked about before you're in the middle of it, where people can have some ideas about like who would I want there? Like, what would I want there? And I think that is the role as hospice becomes more of a corporate enterprise and a money-making function, to have doulas who have the experience of being with people and just focusing not so much on the disease process, but who is the person and how are they moving through this experience? I think is just such a, it just resonates so deeply with people's humanity, which is what I think they need reflected back to them in those days and months before they leave, like that, who they were as a person, because they're so often on the deathbed with all of their regrets about what didn't happen, and to have people reflect back to them what did happen in their life, like who they were and how they affected other people. I think doulas do that in such a beautiful way.
Yeah,
Mm.
so, my approach to all of this is that because of my own personal experience, I come from a perspective of approaching end of life care as I'm trying to empower you.
Yeah.
I might be a guide, but I'm trying to empower you in your process, whether you're the dying person or you're a family member. I mean,
Yeah.
it's you're not my loved one, right? I mean, and I'm happy to come alongside you, but this is your experience and this is what you're going to remember, whether about your loved one's end of life, whether it be for you, whether you're planning ahead, or whether you're a loved one and you're going to be remembering this experience. And so my whole point is how to empower yourself in the process and how to see, hear, and acknowledge and bring all those values that Susan just talked about into the end of life experience. So um, I have really come from a point of view that it's more than just about thinking about end of life at the end of life. It's really about thinking that dying is also part of living, and that these are two natural processes that are ongoing all the time in our lives. And if we acknowledge both of them, then we are living a more balanced life. And the question is really how to integrate a consciousness, an awareness of dying into your living processes, and not just only think about it when we are sick or we're old or, you know, when something happens to somebody else, right? How can we bring an awareness into our daily life on a more regular basis? So, Susan, can I read something that will just be sort of an
Yes, please.
introduction?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, so if you have my book with you, I am going to be reading from, and this is what I call a foundational concept. So this comes from the beginning, and it's on page 9, and it's called I Will Die. I will die. Yep, that statement sums it up. How do you feel when you say this? I will die. This statement is a basic truth, yet understanding how you feel about it can key you in as to how you feel about death. It's a good idea to understand your relationship with death and dying. And if you're saying to yourself, what relationship? Well, then, now you know something too. I will die. Do you accept this? Do you truly accept that it will happen to you? If so, that's good. Acceptance is the first step to understanding death and dying. Where does the understanding of this truth, of this statement, lie for you? Does it reside in your head? If so, you accept death as intellectual knowledge. It exists like a fact. It's like knowing about atomic fusion or traveling to the moon. You know of these things, that they are possible, but they don't really affect you on a daily basis. Similarly, you know that you will die, but you probably never think about it. I will die. Does this truth reside in your heart? Instead of residing in your mind, you feel the truth of this statement in your body or in your emotions. Do you worry about dying? Do you fear what it'll be like when it is your time? Or do you think a lot about death, but not know what to do with all the feelings it generates? Just tuning into how you feel when you realize, I will die, helps you identify the nature of your relationship with death. And by understanding your feelings about death, you will know what you need to work on to prepare for end of life. So, say you have some relationship with the concepts of death and dying, and you accept the statement, I will die. The next question is, are you living by this truth? As human beings, we all hold on to some principles, ideals, or basic truths that we use to guide our life and live by. Do you live with the realization of, I will die, and allow it to guide your life? For example, honesty may be a truth that you try to live by. You try to always tell the truth and never lie. You use honesty in your relationships with others and hope that they respect you back with honesty too. For you, it is one way to stay true to yourself. Or maybe you use equity as a guiding principle. You make decisions and you view life through a lens of being fair and just. You create allies and you fight against injustice. You work hard to live in an equitable world. Honesty and equity are just two examples of qualities that can be used as guiding principles for living. You can use the truth, I will die, to also guide your life. Understanding this truth in your heart and your mind will do much for how you view the world and live life. You see how precious life is, how fleeting it is. You appreciate more and more what you have and what is around you. To realize and live by this truth changes how you make decisions, how you spend your money, and who you love. Historically, people were more aware of this truth. They lived by it because the threats of death lurked everywhere. But now we actually live in a safer society, and medicine is able to treat and cure so many ailments that once would have been fatal. While the causes of death are still numerous and threatening, we are not aware of them as much as we once were and have removed them from our daily consciousness. Well, now you have an opportunity to make a conscious choice, to live by the truth of I will die, to choose to face your own mortality and let it affect how you live, to choose to embrace death. And then the book goes on to explain to you how to embrace death and use this as a guiding principle in your life. So one of the great things I was really fortunate about this book is that when there's so many things I want to say, but let me just say, I was concerned, like, how do you get a person to buy a book on preparing for end of life, right? And I thought, well, if this book is just full of words, because that's what books are, full of words, and a person is coming to this topic of end of life with fear, a little bit of scared, nervousness, anxiety, and they see all these words, they might be like, oh, it's going to be a lot to understand. It's going to be a lot to get through. And I wanted to make this book because that's what the Dummies brand is. I wanted to make it accessible to more people. I wanted to make it simple. I wanted to make it something that was approachable, that people could look at this book and say, oh, I get this. This is simple. I could do this. And I wanted to make it friendly. So I said to Wiley, look, I want to put a lot of illustrations in this book because when they're looking at this book and they're in the bookstore or they're in the library and they're trying to find information and they pick up this book, and if they're leafing through it and they see all these words, it's not going to look friendly. And I wanted to make the subject more friendly. So I asked to have a lot of illustrations put in this book. And so you'll see there are lots of really funny cartoons and illustrations. We even have a character for the book. And so this is all to say that the last sentence that I read to you, which was, you can choose to embrace death. Well, there's a whole later section on what it means to embrace death. And so I told the illustration team I wanted to have an illustration, a cartoon explaining the concept of what it would mean to embrace death in your life. And so I said, I want our character to be hugging the Grim Reaper. So the first time the illustration team went through this permutation, they drew this character of the Grim Reaper in like a cemetery. He's hugging our character, and the guy is like scared out of his mind, like I'm hugging the Grim Reaper. And I was like, oh no, that's the wrong message. That is completely the wrong message. We want to embrace death and feel good about it, right? We want to feel that there is a benefit, a positiveness to embracing death. And I said, you got to make our guy look happy. He's got to be happy embracing death. And they were like, are you sure? Really? And I was like, yeah. So if you look on page 122, there's a great picture of our character hugging the Grim Reaper, and he's just feeling really good about it. And so if you're in the bookstore and you're thinking about it and you're flipping through it and you see that picture, you're like, whoa, that's not what I think about death, right? That catches you off guard and it startles you and you think, oh, I want to know more about what this death and dying thing could be. Like, why are they happy embracing and hugging death? So that's my whole approach in this book. It's a very upbeat, it's very light, it's accessible, it explains in simple language how you can approach the concepts of death and dying, how you can develop a relationship with it, and how you can incorporate it into your life. So it's, while it is about preparing for end of life, it is also so much about how to live, because in fact, what you have to realize is that to prepare for end of life, you have to do it while you're well and while you're living, and not while you're old and sick. And so if you start to prepare while you're healthy and you're well and you're cognitive and you're young, you end up finding that preparing for end of life actually changes so much about the way you just live normally. Susan, you're muted.
I am. I never know what's going to go off in my apartment, so I always try to keep this muted in between. There's a question I want to get to, but I love the in the book. It is friendly, and there's lots of open space and places to contemplate and think about things. But this idea of having a character, like almost a decade ago, these French guys interviewed me on their podcast called The Death Hangout, and what I loved about their website is the Grim Reaper character with the Sith and stuff was just this friendly guy, and like he'd be like paddle boarding with some people, or he'd be having a cocktail like at this nice resort area, and the character would just be always like there and people doing their normal life. And it's so like sort of aligns with what you're saying when people start to think about death. Like I think there's two approaches there. The death is the Grim Reaper that's going to jump out from behind a bush and scare the hell out of you. Which is how I was raised, like, and you don't ever look over at that bush because God forbid you see the Grim Reaper or you see death. And then there's this other approach where you can make choices and you can think about this and you can come to this, like, I think about, I don't know, the amount of time like my parents spent thinking about buying a car. compared to the amount of time they thought about their own deaths and how that would affect their children. And I just think having a book like this to give you an opportunity to approach this when it's not bearing down on you and you aren't in a position where you're making critical decisions just gives you so much more freedom to think about this. So I so appreciate this. And Susan G is asking, how did you become the author of this particular book? And
Thank
I'm
you.
curious, like aligned with that is what was your process in terms of writing this? Did you just get this idea and go with it? Or like had you been putting things together? Or yeah, what was that process like as an author?
So thank you so much for asking that. I guess I had thought I would talk about that originally, but then we got into this great conversation about all these other things. So I actually did not come up with this idea. John Wiley and Son, the publishers, came to me and asked me to write this book.
Ah,
And I
wonderful.
understand from the literary field that is very unusual.
Very,
Uh,
yes.
Um, I
Yes.
actually didn't want to do it. I was in the middle of writing another book. I was finishing up the process of writing another book. So, spoiler alert, I have a second book that will be coming out next year with Simon and Schuster, also on end of life, but very, very different from this book. And so I was writing that book and finishing up that process when John Wiley and Sons approached me and asked me to write the Dummies book. And actually, my initial reaction was like, no, I don't want to write this. I'm so tired. I'm just exhausted from writing my other book. And I honestly felt like I didn't have any more ideas to write. And, but I was, when I explained sort of my situation, we kept the conversation going. I love my editor, Jennifer Yee at John Wiley and Sons, and she gave me a lot of grace and patience in the process. And the more I began to think about it, I realized that writing a dummies book wouldn't be like the book I had just finished. That the For Dummies book would reach a whole population and audience of people that I wouldn't normally have access to, right? And that was really the large incentive for eventually changing my mind and deciding to take on this project, was because, where does For Dummies typically exist, right? I will tell you that For Dummies is considered a comprehensive, simple, accessible guide on a very particular topic. And it is a very well-known, accepted brand. And you find them in libraries, right? Libraries, in small libraries in rural areas. You find them in small communities. When people want to know of a certain topic, you're going to find a lot of For Dummies books. And I just thought, you know what? This is the kind of accessibility that this brand brings will allow me to reach a lot of people that, one, don't normally have access to this kind of information, preparing, end of life, death and dying. And it'll reach all these people that I normally would not be able to have access to. And so that was a
Yeah.
really attractive offer. I will tell you that I had to train for 1 month to write in what's called the Dummies voice. So this book is not my voice. It is it's all my ideas, and it's my style, it's my structure, it's my presentation, but it is written in what's called the Dummies voice. And I had to train for a month to write in the Dummies voice. I actually, as I told you briefly, I come from a pretty academic background, and I wrote a first draft and they're like, no, 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 you have to write for dummies. You have to bring it down more. And then I'd write a second draft and they're like, no, even more dumb, even more dumb. I mean, I can't tell you. I think I had to go like 3 or 4 drafts before I could get to a voice level that was consistent, because what the brand is that they want it to be able to have consistency across the brand, and they want to be able for it to be accessible and readable by anybody who would pick up the book. So it was actually a really great process for me. I discovered a new voice. I actually also discovered that I could be funny. I didn't think I could be funny, but now but in trying to make the topic of death and dying friendly, accessible, simple for everybody, I really realized that I needed to bring in humor. And so as an author, I've decided I could be funny, and it's great. And there are also some of the cartoons in here are quite funny, and it's allowed me to expand my abilities as a writer as well. So my second book is not at all like the Dummies book. It's a very lyrical, beautiful storytelling book, but it'll be such a nice companion. And then I'll be like, whoa, what kind of learner are you? And I've got a book for you. So,
Thank you so much, Virginia. Virginia, your editor is here, Jay Yee, who says, I'm Virginia's editor for this book. Her credentials, experience, and background made us positive that she would be the ideal author, and we were correct. And somebody else asked, like, how did they know to even ask you? Like, how did they become aware of your work, I guess is the question. And maybe that's not a question you can answer, but I'm curious about that. And then I have
well,
a couple more questions for you. Oh, look at he did respond, but I'm curious about your answer, and
okay.
then I'll read hers.
Um, I always ask myself that question every time a potential client
Uh,
calls me. I'm not on social media
yeah,
at
no,
all, not
right.
at all.
Yes, I noticed that.
So I'm not on social media. I only have a website. So I do have my end of life doula website, which is under
I'll
tillthelastdoula.com.
post
And I
that.
have my author website, which is virginiachang.com. And that's it. I'm not on social media at all, but I do a lot of speaking engagements. I do a lot of education. I speak at hospitals, hospices, colleges, universities. I speak at medical schools, nurses associations, and I I do a lot of public speaking in the public. Libraries, senior centers. I mean, basically, I'll speak for your group. I'll speak and come and speak to your group if you want, because I believe so much in the power of this message and the impact it can have on people to not only just change their own end of life experience, but to change the end of life experience for their loved ones, and to even potentially change the way they currently live. So I do a lot of public speaking. I do a lot of patient and client work, and people just find me. I guess so. That's okay. I'm not sure what did Jennifer say.
She said, after conducting research, primarily online and within the death doula community, Virginia's name kept appearing in articles through various forms of media as a strong voice on this topic. So that aligns with what you are also asking. There's a question here from Jane, and she says, how would you respond to family members? This is probably a question you get frequently. I don't think this is unusual, but how do you respond to family members who think it's too depressing to talk about death and planning? My family thinks I should think about death, that I think about death too much, probably because they don't want to talk about it at all. And this is something in our death cafes that we host that we hear repeatedly, parents saying, I try to talk to my children about this, and they just are like, you're not dying. Why are you talking about this? We don't want to talk about this. Or kids that want to talk to their parents, and the parents are like, oh, we're not there yet. We don't need to have these conversations. So I'm just kind of curious, how do you bridge that gap for families, or how do you help them bridge that gap?
Well, all I can say is I try to model it. I mean, I think you can tell from just the short time that I've been with you. I mean, I don't talk about death and dying as if it's a heavy, sad, morose topic. If you read the book, it is full of positive perspectives and viewpoints
Yeah.
on how to change your frame of mind about thinking and talking about the topic. And I don't tell people how to do it differently. I just model it and hope that my energy, my enthusiasm, my viewpoint, my perspective on it begins to like infiltrate into the way that they think about themselves, their situation, and their loved ones. And um, you can't just tell people like to do it differently. They have to experience it, right? And
Yes.
I'm an end of life doula, and when they see me and they work with me and they see that I'm not at all sad and heavy, it makes them question their own thinking about it and whether there are different pathways. So I would just
Yes.
say model it,
Thank you.
just model it. And I
I
think,
love that
even
answer.
when I wrote the book, it was a simple case. I mean, I think there was one chapter that I'd written where I'm introducing these concepts, and most of the concepts I had introduced were very neutral, but I wanted to
Mm.
end the chapter on a rise, like to really producing, start offering really different frameworks for thinking about it. And so I talked about how uh, death only happens once in your lifetime, that there's
Right.
no going back to dying, learning about what went wrong, and then trying to get it right the second time. That's not feasible, right? That's how so much of what we learn in life, right, is trial and error, right? We try something,
Yeah.
it doesn't work, but what did we learn from it? And that'll help inform us moving forward. Well, it doesn't work that way if you're the dying person, right? You only go through death
Mm-hmm.
once. You only experience it once. So you want to make it good the first time through. So I compared death to like winning the jackpot.
Yes.
And
Yes.
people were pretty astounded. But I was like, why not? You can frame your experiences in any way you want. You can make them happy. You can make them joyful. You can make it beautiful. You can make it a celebration. You can make it about honor and love. And there are just so many positive adjectives. Why should we only be focusing on the sorrow of loss? I mean, yes, you will feel sad. You will feel this intense pain of absence, but it's learning to acknowledge all the pain of grief with, the beautiful and amazing qualities of a life lived and acknowledging that life as well. And so that was another great thing about writing this book, was that it gave me a lot of opportunities to think of really creative metaphors for explaining concepts. And, you can't just say, well, think positively. I mean, it's not so easy, right? It's not so
Yes.
easy to just tell people, oh, think positively, right? You have to uh, give them tools, images, metaphors, different frameworks in which to think about different concepts. Susan, can I read one other passage that I think might
Please.
help,
Yes. Yes.
that I think well illustrates this idea? So here we go. What's the ultimate happy event? Let's preparing for end of life. Let's think of it like wedding planning. No, really. So What does planning for end of life look like? It's similar to planning a wedding. It's a big event that's all about you and celebrates a major transition in life. In the case of a wedding, you are transitioning from being a single person to being in a committed relationship with someone else. At end of life, you are transitioning from this life to whatever may be next. Think of it this way. Your wedding day is a special event that most people anticipate and plan for extensively. It is a special day, and you want it to be memorable. Imagine your upcoming wedding. You were intimately involved in all the planning and all the decision down to the tiniest detail. First, you decide where the wedding will be held, the location and the venue. Then you might decide upon the theme and the color scheme of the wedding. Next, you decide who will attend, the food, the decor, the dress code, and the flowers. You consider the atmosphere, the program, and what kind of music you wish to have. You decide upon each and every element of your wedding based upon what you wish and prefer. Planning a wedding is hard work and a lengthy process. There are many things to consider and a lot of decisions to be made. You might even hire a wedding planner, as shown in this figure. And there's this wonderful figure of a wedding planner who's thinking about the flowers and the cake and the wedding invitations and the wedding dress, the wedding rings, the location of the service. You might hire a wedding planner to help you through everything, present options, and handle some of the logistics and the coordination, and just make the whole process a little more manageable and smooth. Having a wedding planner takes some of the burden off of you and allows you to enjoy more of the time leading up to the wedding. And if everything goes as planned, the day is grand. You are the center of attention. You can relax and enjoy yourself. You can bask in all your glory. Everyone is having a wonderful time. There are smiles all around, laughter and tears. Much love is present in the air and in everyone's hearts. Congratulations! What a wonderful wedding. Of course, even with all the planning that you do, it doesn't guarantee that the wedding day will be picture perfect. Most times the wedding will be beautiful and go without a hitch. Yet you cannot anticipate or plan for every eventuality. There may be a little snafus or little hiccups, and possibly, if something major goes wrong or a drunk guest makes a scene, you'll have established a system of response so that somebody else will take care of it for you. There'll be others who handle complications that arise and provide support so that you can continue to enjoy your wedding day. All right, now that I've set the scene for your wedding, imagine that your death can be exactly the same. Yes, it can. Approaching end-of-life planning may be easier for you if you conceptualize it like a wedding. It's a similar process with similar issues and questions to address, but with a longer timeline and an uncertain date. So just as you plan a wedding, plan for the end of your life. You wouldn't go to a wedding with no planning at all, would you? Nor would you have someone else plan your whole wedding for you without your input. That sounds crazy. It's the same at end of life. Move through the process in accordance with your wishes and preferences. Retain control and make the decisions, big and small. In this fashion, you move towards the big day, knowing more about what it's going to be like and what's likely to happen. There's a greater sense of security and calm about everything because you have planned. Get help if you need with the planning. Just like wedding planners, there are end-of-life doulas who can help you prepare for end of life. And then there's a nice figure showing an end-of-life doula who's thinking about the casket and the headstone and the family and the flowers and all that sort of stuff. Doulas can work and support you through the lengthy planning process. They can talk through your options, act as sounding boards, be your cheerleader when the subject of death gets you down. They help keep you focused on the big picture. Bring in an end-of-life doula early on in the planning process. It helps smooth the way, eases your conscience, relieves some of the burden, and allows you time and space to savor living. Lastly, when the big day arrives, it will be all about you. You will be the center of attention. You may not be awake or conscious or even aware of what is going on around you, but there is a sense of security, calm, and even relief going into the end, having planned it all out. And all the while, your family and friends are present, remembering, honoring, and celebrating you. You are surrounded by love, laughter, and tears. How lovely.
Mm.
So this is my approach to end of life. This is my approach to preparing for end of life. And as you can see, like, I'm not sad. And I don't use sad metaphors. I had a reader. This was so cool. I had a reader write to me by email this week who wrote to me, and that's why I'm really glad I wrote to you, who wrote to me this way, Rika, and said something to the effect of, thinking about preparing for end of life like wedding planning took some of the fear away about dying.
Yes. Yeah.
And she said, thank you so much. It was brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you, Virginia. That is a brilliant, I mean, it's just we plan for like Americans are planners. We just plan for everything, but we miss this huge thing that that could not just affect like our last experiences of our life, but also just the ripple effect of so many people around us. I'm curious, since you've embarked on this sort of life, if you have had these conversations with your own family and how they were received, like how you're moving through this in your own family. Just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, well, um, my family saw how painful and how dysfunctional I
Mhm.
became when I had to move through all my parents' death.
Mm, yeah.
And so I think it's like a transformation that not only have I come to an acceptance and peace about what happened to my own parents, but that I could have a really positive framework for how to view death. Because honestly, I could easily see that I could become mired down in the grief that I was in. It's so strong, it drags you down. And I had no support. I had no acknowledgement by any close family, any friends, community, or society at large who even recognized that what I was going through was difficult. And I could easily see that with our societal attitude about, you know, get over it and move on, get back to work, I could have been caught into prolonged grief. It could have
Yes.
been something that would have consumed me for decades about the way I handled it. and, doubting myself about whether I did the best I could for my parents. And um, it can be, I can easily see that could have been a pathway for me. And to
Yes.
understand that where I am now and, and the way I think about death, and that I'm
Yes.
able to write a book and that I'm able to support others is just, it's phenomenal. It's crazy. It's just unbelievable. And if I had to say, it was learning about death just woke me up.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I'm curious, Virginia, like in terms of your day-to-day life, what has changed since you have been engaging with death in such a conscious way? Um, because I would imagine that it has affected like sort of every aspect of your life, but I'm wondering, like, just in some concrete ways, what is different for you now than before your parents died, and in terms of just how you think about things?
I live much more simply.
Hmm.
I pause so much more than I ever used to.
Mm,
I notice things and I appreciate small things. I really appreciate small things. Um, and I feel that I deserve to feel good about who I am, where I am in life, and that I deserve to have joy in my life. um,
yeah, that's
it
wonderful.
can be it can be
Actually,
simple things like, just acknowledging people more, saying hello, and really speaking from a place of intention, like not just saying hello, but really seeing that person as you're saying hello, right? And really looking at where you are and what you're doing and making conscious choices about simple things. I really, it's just changed my life on a daily basis. And um, I'm not afraid to die. And if I should die tomorrow, that's okay. I'm okay
yeah.
with where I am.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm curious for people that are listening to this conversation and they may not have gotten the book yet, and hopefully I'll put up if there's a place where you would like them to go, like some people don't want people going to Amazon. If you'd rather them go to your website, let me know. When we send out the recording, I'll also send out sort of any information you send me about, like we'll put your website in there, any other information. But um, if somebody like if you had to like your top three things that you would tell people or that you've observed with people that you've worked with that could be useful before they're in the situation where they're like critically ill or navigating like a lot of pain, or just they're in the sort of stages of my body is shifting from a body that's alive and kind of regenerating to a body that's in decline. Like, kind of what, if you had to say three things to them to prepare in advance, what would they be?
Could I say,
Yeah,
um,
if you want to read something, that would be
could I
also
say it's
great.
just one thing? I'll say
Yes.
it's not one. I would say it would be one thing that I would say.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just read that. Um, okay, so if it, this is called I Love Myself. In this part of this book, I talk about emotional preparation for end of life. Love is the big emotion at end of life. Everything that is happening and occurring is about love. It is maybe unspoken, but it's all about love. You don't want to die because you love life so much. You worry about your family because you love them so much. You love the person who you used to be, but not enough the person you have become. You don't realize that when your loved one encourages you to eat, move, or pray more, it is because they love you too much and are afraid of your death. You are embarrassed by all the help and care that you need rather than accepting it as an expression of love from others. Everything is about love. Know that you deserve all the care and love you've received in life and will receive at end of life. And to know that you deserve it, you must feel worthy of receiving it. And that begins with loving yourself first. When we love ourselves, we not only love to give, but receiving love is also much easier. Loving ourselves comes from a place of wholeness. We see ourselves, others, and the world around us with a sense of peace, contentment, and love. The other good reason to love yourself is at the end of life, you start spending so much more time with yourself. And this happens for many reasons, including the many losses you experience, a need to conserve your time and energy, and the thoughts that you have are too big to share with others. For whatever reasons, you will spend more and more time with yourself as you approach the end of life. And as you spend more quiet time with yourself, being with that person all the time, it helps to love that person, you. This is the wisdom I have gained as I've accompanied others in their journey towards death. I see some people struggle while others are more serene. I see some people who are not comfortable in the quiet space at the end of life, while others are content. One of the things that I've discovered is that when you have to spend so much time with yourself, you have to like who you are. And liking who you are is something you must work on while you are living, not when you're close to death. So to prepare for end of life, ask yourself, do you love yourself? And that is the one thing that I would offer to anyone as they think about how to move into aging, illness, or end of life, or just life. Do you love yourself?
Yeah, that makes all the difference, doesn't it? Virginia, just in terms of some practical things, and then I wanted to see if people have questions here or want to put questions up in the chat. And just a reminder that if you put your hand raising tool up, which is at the bottom where all those little icons are at the bottom or top. If you're on an iPad or something, there's a little hand raising. And then I can unmute you. And we're doing this for those of you that joined us a little bit late because we've had some Zoom bombing recently in these meetings. So we're going to prevent that from happening in this one. But Virginia, I'm
Oh,
just curious. I wanted to ask you if there's anything, there was a question I wanted to ask you, but I also will finish by just asking you if there's anything else you want to kind of wrap this part up with before we move into questions. But my question is, um, for some people, hiring a doula is not a financial practicality for them. And I'm wondering if there's other resources that you could recommend or other ways that they can think about approaching this. I'm thinking there's a lot of solo agers, a lot of people who may not be in a situation where they have supportive family, and just curious if there's resources for folks that find themselves in those situations.
okay, great. So I'm going to get to that in a second. I'm going to just say a couple of things. One, buy this book, go to your local bookstore. That would be
Yes,
I would love
the
that.
best.
Please, I mean, I know you could, it's maybe easier to get it online, go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble, but really, please go to your local bookstore
Support your,
and have them
yes.
order it and bring it in for you. That would make the book more available to more people and to just raise more awareness. So please support your local bookstore. 2, while the 3 passages that I've read to you have been very, 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 let's say, positive framework minded and more about shifting your viewpoint about death and dying, this book is full of practical information. There's tons of stuff about understanding your healthcare team, looking at all the different members and roles. There's a whole section on understanding advanced directives, medical orders, estate planning. There's tons of practical information about after death arrangements and all the different, body disposition methods of everything from burial to water cremation to donating your organs. There's a ton of practical information in here. So as a follow-up to Susan's question about resources, one, you could have a book like this that approaches it from not only a practical standpoint, but also from I like to think of this as a holistic whole person approach, right? It's not just about the practical logistical matters, but it's also addressing you as a whole person in terms of your emotional, social, and spiritual components. And that is how the book is organized in terms of chapters. So with regards to, Susan said, like more resources, well, there's a whole chapter in there in terms of how to ask for help, how to let other people into your life, right? How to let more people into your life so that you don't have to go through this alone. Because unfortunately, what you probably realized and what you know is that we are conditioned by society to have this strong persona, like we can do it on our own. We're strong. We don't need other people. And, maybe that works well for when you're a young adult. But if you're aged, you're elderly, or you're sick, these issues are community-based issues. And so you need to open yourself up to your community. And you may think you don't have a community, but you do. And it's really a question of allowing others in. So I think you actually have more resources available to you than you realize. But again, it's really taking a different framework about how to view the situation you may be in. So I think once you start to open up to other possibilities, you'd realize that there are way more resources out there than you ever imagined. And you'd be surprised at what people and who may step up.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Susan G., I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, and apologies for the video being off, but why don't you go ahead? Thank you. And you
Thank
can
you.
ask your question.
I do have a question. I just also wanted to say one of the things I appreciate, there are many, of this conversation was it made me realize how fortunate I was and my family was when my father died in the hospital in 2010 in Seattle. And we knew he was dying, and the family, they moved him to a room at the end when they said there's nothing more we can do for you, and they put him in a room. It was a double room, but they put him in a room where there was nobody else in the other bed. And so we, the family, got to sit and be with him for 3 days until he died. And they would come in, the nurses would come in and check on him, but we got to have the space, and they seemed really understanding. And there was a social worker who talked to us, and kind of prepared us some. And so I felt when I listened to your stories, Virginia, which I'm very sorry you had to go through those things, but it helped me feel even more at peace, because my father was almost 89. He felt very ready. He had been very accepting of death all his life, I think. But your perspective just really helped me feel even better. So I appreciate that. My question is about in the book, is there support for the people who want to help and I'm thinking specifically of a friend of mine who had a friend who was dying, and she arranged to have the life celebration, the memorial, before her friend died, so that her friend could hear all the people saying all the wonderful things about her. And I'm wondering, is there something like that in your book that would help people?
Absolutely. There's a
Oh,
whole
great.
section on pre-death planning. And yeah, so there's a whole section on pre-death planning that addresses like all the things that you can do, which is like living celebrations.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
so you can look at that as well. Um, and I was going to say something else, but now it's just slipped my mind. Um, okay, if it comes back to me, I'll
Thank you very
yeah.
much. Thank you for writing this.
Thank you, Susan G. That reminds me, sometimes there's people that are not able, for whatever reason, um, to do that kind of thing. When I was working in hospice, it was not that unusual that people would have a celebration of the person's life while they were still alive, so that they got to hear everything that their loved ones wanted them to hear. And it wasn't people gathered in like a funeral, like in a church or a funeral home, talking about them after they were dead. So, like, I think 100% that can be an incredible benefit to people as they're transitioning or they're in their like declining. And for people that may not be able to orchestrate that, or people that may not be comfortable with that kind of spotlight on them, a very close friend of mine who was one of our hospice volunteers became quite ill, and he had supported hundreds of people during the time he was a social work hospice volunteer. And I talked to a friend of ours that worked with him who had moved across the country, and she wasn't able to come back. But she wrote one of the most beautiful and specific letters that I have ever read in my life about who this person was and the benefit of his life to so many people. And we had an opportunity to read that to him, and he was so humble, he couldn't believe it was about him. And I said to him, Bob, I just have this thought that maybe, like, you have the hospice volunteers are coming to visit you. Maybe we have you like this read to you in the morning when you wake up and before you go to bed, so you don't forget who you are in the middle of all this illness. So he agreed. And when he moved to the hospice house, like, in the morning and in the evening, but he said he would only let that happen if, like, I would read that at his funeral. So it was this constant reminder of his benefit to so many people and the goodness, because he said, this is so helpful because I get so lost in the disease part and the discomfort of my body. But to remember who I really am is so important to me. So I would say to people that may not be able to do those other things, that is such a meaningful thing to do for somebody, and to have that read at their bedside repeatedly, so that they really take that into who they are, and they because we can help people come to that place to love themselves when that's hard for them.
Yes, that's a powerful, powerful support that you can do for someone who's dying. And this is actually
Yeah,
something commonly that I do with my clients, which
yeah,
is um, like many families, many people who are dying, they get barraged with inquiries and friends, families, distant people, who hear and they want to like, how are you? How are you? Like, can I come by to see you? I mean, eventually it gets to a point where communication is a challenging issue for the family, right? There are just too many emails to they can't answer personally, especially when you're getting closer to the end and, care becomes a really big issue. So like answering the number of emails and inquiries that come in from outside, it just becomes to be too much. So one thing that we do actually commonly do is I have families ask all these people to write letters or notes, to send them by mail or email. We print them all out. We put them in a basket by the bedside, and they're just read like constantly all the time. And it's amazing. It's a window into uh you know their past, and understand reminding them of who they are. New stories and new facts come out, and it's it's really rooting and grounding for the the people who are dying. I mean, it's a powerful experience. Actually, I also talk about that in the book too. So there are tons of ideas of things you can do at different points. So I do want to say, though, this book is unlike other books that are out there. This is not a book for people who are dying. This is not a book for the caregivers or the families. This is not a book for end-of-life doulas or other healthcare professionals or nurses or doctors or people in the end-of-life care space. This is a book for everyone, every single person, right? You don't have to be in the end-of-life care space to need or want a book like this. This is for everybody because this is just a part of life. This is something that we will all go through. And it's not just for the ones who are experiencing it now with a family member or loved one or a friend, right? This is something that will be part of every person's life experience, that you will know somebody, you will experience death in some way. And so understanding, just beginning to allow these concepts to just start, be part of your life, just really changes the whole way you think about how you're moving through living. And so it's not a, it's for everyone, and it's full of, yes. So enjoy reading. You're muted, Susan.
I know I'm getting better at this. I'm noticing the time, and I just want to if there's anybody that has a question or something that they would like to share, we have a couple of minutes if you would like to put your hand up or if you'd like to post something in the chat. But Virginia, I just want to, in the meanwhile, just thank you so much for a beautiful talk and a beautiful book. And I am so grateful. I was just so surprised when you told me that you had written this book, and I was like, 40 years later, yay. I just am so grateful that there's something that is simple and not in sort of like simple in that it's uncomplicated, and that at a time when there's so much complication in people's lives, like to even think about this for a lot of people, it's just like overwhelming. But to make this so simple and so easy to follow, I just appreciate that so much. Michelle's hand is up, so I'm going to come back to Michelle. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Yeah.
Hi there.
Michelle, why don't you go ahead? There you go.
Yeah. Thank you so much. A beautiful, wonderful presentation. Very informative. Definitely going to read the book. And my question is organizing the paperwork, where to put it, and that kind of thing. And I'm kind of worried about the passwords, the electronic stuff. Do you cover all that stuff too?
Yep.
Or do you have any tips that you can share right now?
No, I think that'll be too long for the amount of time we have left. But there's a whole chapter on
presentation. A whole nother presentation.
There's a whole chapter on organizing your files, which is either using a good old file cabinet, gathering your important documents, as well as using the new and improved digital file cabinet. So all of that's addressed. And yes, so like I got pretty nitty gritty. I mean, yeah.
That's the research person in you. I like it.
And every time there was like, well, you could do it this way, but what if you did it that way? I like literally presented every scenario for anything that I would raise, so that however that you might think about it, there's, there are options.
Thank you for what you do.
Thank
I
you.
love the event planning part. I mean, it's so right on. And that death is really about living. I love that. That just really stuck with me. Thank you.
Yeah, I loved it. Writing this book made me realize preparing for end of life is a whole person approach, but we we as a society spend too much time focusing on just the physical aspect of preparing for end of life. And then even if we take all the physical aspects, we then focus too much on just the paperwork. I mean, yes, the paperwork is important, but it's just such a small part of, we want to prepare for end of life from a whole person approach. And this book really gave me an opportunity to conceptualize and, verbalize and then define it and put it all out. I mean, it's not like preparing for end of life from a chronological standpoint. It's really like, who are you? And how can you do it for yourself? Right? So it's a very individualized thing, because in the end, that's what makes death wonderful, is that you make it personal for yourself. Oh, I can see that I messed up my hair.
I can't think of a better, I know, that's the important stuff. How do I look?
That's right, I messed up my
mother
hair.
was asking me that on her deathbed. Have I lost weight? Is my hair okay? I was like, you look great for somebody that's going to die like any minute. So I just want to thank all of you for coming. I just want to thank you so much, Virginia, for sharing your just wisdom, your kind heart, your approach to something that so many people have such a difficult time turning towards, and that you have turned it towards it with your whole life. I just really appreciate this. To those of you that were able to join us, I'm just going to put up in the chat, if it's possible, and this is not like, I just always hate this part, but I just, if it's possible, if you're to make a donation, that's what keeps the foundation, particularly the community education programming, free and open to as many people as possible. You, the good-natured selves that you are, to go through this without your videos on. I so appreciate that. And I also appreciate that this is the first event this is the fourth one that we've done. This is the first one in the last 4 events that hasn't had some kind of crazy thing happen in it. So Virginia, thank you so much. I'm going to turn off the recording, and I will be able to stay for a couple of minutes. I don't know what Virginia's schedule is, but just on behalf of the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation, thank you all for being here. And share the book, please. I will put that up in the chat as soon as we end this recording. Thank you so much. Preparing for End of Life for Dummies. And I'll put up the link to Virginia's website.